Hello students, it's Dr. Church, and yes, I have my mathematics Batman shirt on today. So lots of equations there for you to solve, and that will be extra credit at the end of the video if you can tell me what the final answer is at the end if you plug in 2.7 on this side and work your way across. Okay, so today we're going to talk about agribusiness, a little bit about agriculture, then I'll have just a little bit on aquaculture coming up, and we talk about farming and fishing and good things that we need in order to live and to eat. Industrial farming methods. By the end of this, I'd like for you to describe modern large-scale agriculture. We take for granted the food that shows up in our grocery stores, but it comes from somewhere, and that somewhere is a farm. We've had some shortages with the COVID-19 situation and supply chain management. And then on the other end of that, we've got farmers that are actually dumping things out, dumping out milk, getting rid of farm products because there's no place for it to go, no transportation systems and storage facilities. And so it's a very critical supply chain that gets food to our tables every day. What then are some of the benefits and consequences of genetically modified organisms as well, which is another issue in agriculture. So let's just take a look at some modern industrial farming methods and how they've transformed agriculture. We would call this industrial agriculture. When we think about the farm, you probably do think of this situation, just somebody out on a farm, not necessarily behind a plow, with two horses or a mule, but a tractor and a farm. But these days in industrial agriculture, this is big business, and there's a lot of technology and corporatization that has gone into farming. It's multi-billion dollar industry, and we need it. It's not optional. It's known as agribusiness. Now, for agribusiness to function, we need what is called an energy subsidy. An energy subsidy, and what that means is in order to produce consumable products on the scale that we need to produce them, we have to subsidize that with fossil fuel. So the fossil fuel energy and human energy input per calorie of food produced. So there's a certain amount of energy. If you think about energy transfer scientifically, there's a certain amount of energy that comes out of nutrition, out of food, but there's a certain amount of energy that goes into producing it in terms of fuel and actually pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers and a lot of other things that goes into that. And that is mostly coming from fossil fuel. Let's take a look at an example. If we take 20 kilograms of grain to make 1 kilogram of beef. Now remember that 1 kilogram is about 2.2 pounds. Wife just set out some steaks for tonight, which is probably around 2 pounds to feed our entire family. Well, it took 20 kilograms of grain in order to raise that roughly 2 pounds of beef. Energy subsidies in modern agriculture basically come from fossil fuels, from oil and coal, to produce fertilizers, pesticides, to harvest the food, to transport it, to keep it cool. It's a very energy intensive process to bring the food to your table. Transporting food from the farm to your plate is another large energy subsidy. The energy subsidies in agriculture, if we think about the hunter-gatherer cultures, the energy substance there was fairly small. Small-scale corn is also fairly small. As you start to scale it up to coastal fishing, large-scale egg harvesting, if you've ever seen chicken houses, they require quite a bit of energy. And then you get up to grass-fed beef. And if you look at this scale, what you see is calories of energy input per calorie of food produced. And what this is showing us is that there's quite a bit more energy that has to go in versus the amount of energy that we actually get out as human consumers. The typical U.S. diet, that's 10 calories in per calorie of food out. And then offshore fishing, which requires, that's the highest. So I guess that's in terms of energy subsidy. The aquaculture in that regard for offshore fishing is fairly high. Now we'll also see that there's farm fishing. Actually had a friend of mine who was a fish farmer. He was a hog farmer first, and then he became a fish farmer and raised tilapia in gigantic tubs. And it's pretty interesting. Well, what is the Green Revolution? The Green Revolution looked at crop management techniques, mechanization of industrial farms. Instead of having people in the fields actually doing hand labor, we use tractors and combines and all sorts of harvesting. We have equipment, we have fertilization, irrigation, actually getting water to the crops is a significant challenge, and that's going to be water management is continuing to be a challenge, especially into the large agricultures like California. Improve crop varieties, and then what's called the economies of scale, the observation that average cost of production falls as output increases. So that's why you see these gigantic farms, okay? The cost of producing that one little plant goes down when you've got all these thousands and thousands of plants. And that the Green Revolution is really the idea of being able to produce enough food for the 7.5 billion people in the world through agricultural processes. So within the Green Revolution, let's look at some of the pesticides that are used. The monocropping is an agricultural method that utilizes large plantings of a single species or variety. This gives us an efficiency. When you're just growing one thing, then the requirements to farm it go down versus growing many different things. But there's advantages to monocropping, but there's also disadvantages to it in terms of pesticides and herbicides, insecticides that are needed. What are pesticides? They're just natural or synthetic substances that control organisms that we would consider to be pests, and mostly that's going to be other insects. I can remember the first time I tried to plant a little garden in my backyard. I was so happy and so proud of myself. I'd grown some squash and some other vegetables, and I just thought it just looked wonderful. I was so excited about it, and I just walked out the next day and they were all gone. The pest had got into it because I had not put a pesticide or an insecticide on the plants, and so when the bugs moved in, they literally destroyed everything that was there, and I just didn't know any better. Herbicides are pesticides that target certain plant species that compete with the crops, and so insecticides and herbicides are pesticides that allow the crops to grow. One of the problems with pesticides is that when we apply a pesticide and the crop is infested with the pest, then of course the pesticide will kill the pesticides. We apply the new pesticides, but then not all of the pests die. Some of the stronger, more resistant ones will survive, and then they will reproduce and populate in the basically stronger strain of that species. And so we have to develop stronger pesticides or apply more pesticides, and that's what's called the pesticide treadmill. Pests can sometimes evolve resistance, and that can be a real issue over time. And finally, let's look at GMOs. You've probably heard about genetically modified organisms. It's revolutionizing agriculture. Some of the benefits of genetically modified plants and vegetables and whatnot is a greater yield. They can actually have the fruit bearing part of the plants can be enhanced. You can get better food quality. They'll actually alter the genetic structure in order to make certain things taste better or have a better texture. It can actually reduce the necessity of pesticides. Some of these plant strains that are genetically engineered are in fact pesticide resistant, and so that you don't need to apply the chemicals to the plants as much. And so as these things are developed, we can increase the amount of food and reduce hunger within the world, and also of course increase profits. So what are some of the concerns with GMOs or genetic engineering? Well, some people wonder, well, golly, if we kind of tamper with nature, is that going to be safe? Are we going to modify the plants in such a way that they would become harmful or have long-term effects on people, or people might be allergic to certain genetically modified organisms or plants that are consumed? It reduces the effects of biodiversity. Generally, in biology, we learn about biology diversity, and within earth science, we learn that as well, that um, diversity of organisms is usually a good thing within an ecology. And so genetically modifying to a single source type of plant could reduce that. And then, of course, how do we regulate it? Because these are things that are happening within a laboratory, within the scientific community, and we want to make sure that there's oversight in terms of our food products that get to our tables. So this is a little bit about agriculture, industrial farming. You probably haven't thought much about it, but I want you to think about it today when you go to your table, to your cupboard, and have food, especially, well, anything, pretty much anything that's coming out of there is been impacted by some of the issues that we've talked about today. So this is Dr. Church. I hope you learned something, and study hard.